If you are over the age of 50, there is a real chance someone in your own family, a father, a grandfather, an uncle you barely remember, stood somewhere near a battlefield like the one you are about to hear about, and never said a word about it for the rest of their life. This is one of those quiet, almost forgotten stories, the kind that never made it into the history books your children read in school, and it deserves a few minutes of your attention before it disappears from living memory for good. A British tank crew from the 15th and 19th King's Royal Hussars moves along the River Aller in Germany, April 14th, 1945, with the war weeks from over and every remaining German position feeling like it should be the last one. Somewhere ahead, a German crew is crouched behind a strange, stubby gun nobody in the regiment has seen before, short-barreled, oddly proportioned, nothing like the long, familiar silhouette of the anti-tank guns they have spent years learning to fear. When it fires, the man who later wrote the regiment's official history would describe it simply as a new weapon and an interesting example of German improvisation. Neither he nor anyone else that day knew they were looking at one of the last genuinely original pieces of artillery engineering Germany would ever field. That gun was the Panzerabwehrwerfer 600, and it was never meant to be another heavy, exhausting anti-tank gun for crews already worn down by 5 years of retreat. It was meant to give an ordinary infantry crew the killing power of a full-sized cannon in a package light enough for a handful of men to drag into position and disappear again before anyone could return fire. By 1943, German ordnance planners were staring at an uncomfortable trade-off. Heavier anti-tank guns like the 7.5 centimetre Pak 40 could punch through Allied armor reliably, but at a weight of roughly 1,425 kilograms, they needed a full crew and a towing vehicle to move, resources Germany's collapsing logistics network increasingly could not spare. Lighter guns moved easily but could no longer punch through the thickening armor rolling off American and Soviet production lines. Army planners wanted something that had never really existed before, a weapon that hit as hard as the heavy guns while weighing a fraction as much, and building it meant abandoning almost everything about how a conventional cannon worked. Rheinmetall Borsig took up the specification, with Krupp contributing work on early barrel and carriage designs, and their answer rested on a genuinely clever piece of physics called the high-low pressure system. Instead of building a thick, heavy barrel able to survive the full force of the propellant charge, the way every conventional gun did, engineers packed the propellant into a small, immensely strong chamber at the rear where pressures could reach over 1,100 kilograms per square centimeter, then bled that pressure gradually through a set of vents into a much wider, lightweight, smoothbore barrel. The shell still left the muzzle with real force behind it, but the barrel itself never had to survive the violence of the original blast, letting the entire weapon come in at roughly 600 kilograms, which is where its designation actually comes from, not a velocity or a date the way most people assume, but the weapon's own weight in kilograms. A prototype reached Hitler for demonstration in late 1944, and production began that December. If you're enjoying this, a subscribe helps. Now, back to what that strange gun could actually do once it reached the front. The finished weapon fired a thin, stabilized, shaped charge shell derived from an existing mortar bomb design, weighing about 2.7 kilograms and capable of punching through roughly 140 millimeters of vertical armor at effective ranges out to 750 meters. Performance genuinely comparable to the far heavier Pak 40 despite using a fraction of the propellant. It could also fire a separate high-explosive round for general infantry support, meaning a single gun and crew could now cover the job that had previously required 2 separate weapons and 2 separate supply chains. Production never came close to the planned rate of 1,000 guns a month, hampered by an already collapsing rail network and dwindling raw material, and only around 260 examples were completed before the factories making them were overrun, with roughly 155 in German hands by the 1st of March, 1945. Set against the guns it was meant to replace, the achievement is hard to overstate. The Panzerabwehrwerfer weighed less than half of what a Pak 40 weighed, while matching its armor-piercing performance closely enough that a much smaller crew could move it by hand across ground. A towed heavy gun could never have reached in time. Where the shoulder-fired Panzerfaust gave a single soldier a one-shot answer to a tank at close range, this weapon gave a small crew something closer to genuine artillery, repeatable fire, real range, and a high explosive option, wrapped in a carriage. Set against the guns it was meant to replace, the achievement is hard to overstate. The Panzerabwehrwerfer weighed less than half of what a Pak 40 weighed, while matching its armor-piercing performance closely enough that a much smaller crew could move it by hand across ground. A towed heavy gun could never have reached in time. Where the shoulder-fired Panzerfaust gave a single soldier a one-shot answer to a tank at close range, this weapon gave a small crew something closer to genuine artillery, repeatable fire, real range, and a high explosive option, wrapped in a carriage light enough to reposition after every shot. Exactly the kind of mobility infantry anti-tank crews had been asking for since the earliest years of the war. A persistent claim repeated across plenty of modern sources holds that the Panzerabwehrwerfer never actually fired a shot in anger before the war ended, arriving too late and in too few numbers to matter. The regimental history of the 15th and 19th King's Royal Hussars says otherwise, describing German crews using exactly this weapon against British armor along the River Aller in the war's final weeks. The confusion says less about the gun and more about how thin the surviving paper trail is for a weapon built in its final months, one documented encounter, recorded by the officers who lived through it, against an assumption repeated because almost nothing else survived to contradict it. Germany surrendered before self-propelled versions of the gun could reach prototype stage, and before production ever came close to the numbers its planners had promised. Only a handful of complete examples survive in museums today, a strange footnote next to the war's more famous heavy artillery. Yet the underlying idea behind it, trading a heavy barrel for a controlled pressure drop to make a genuinely powerful gun light enough to carry, did not die with the factories that built it. Post-war recoilless rifle designs across multiple armies picked up the same basic principle, refined it, and built an entire category of light infantry anti-tank weapons still in service today around a piece of physics, a rushed, half-finished German program worked out in its very last winter. Back along the River Aller, the young officer writing down what his regiment had just faced could not have known any of that. He only knew his men had met a weapon he had never seen before and never expected to see again. What Rheinmetall's engineers built into that 600-kilogram gun was never meant to save the war it was built for. And by April of 1945, nothing could have. It was meant to prove that a cannon did not need to be heavy to be dangerous. And in the handful of months it had left, it proved exactly that. Extraordinary machines, a cause that deserved to lose. That contradiction is the whole story.